right? I think so funny. We are getting sight of our other person houses, right? You are now looking at my my room, my bedroom wall. It's so funny. It's
Technology,
person.
COVID has changed a lot
Yeah,
concerning.
we are live. Okay. Hi, everybody. Good morning to you all. I'd like to say hello to our dear colleagues, postgraduate students, and newcomers that are here, ladies and gentlemen. To those who don't know me, I'm Professor Cristina Pacheco. Uh, Currently, I coordinate this program, the Master Program in International Relations, and it is a great pleasure to me to welcome all of you to our opening lecture. This opening lecture is going to be a particular one, I think, because we are not only discussing the hot topic of the moment, Russia and Ukraine, but we are going to be able to listen to Professor Konstantin Kурылев, um, which is a Russian. So, from a Russian perspective, our distinguished guest is going to be able to give us a perspective that we haven't heard so far, right? And that's after 2 difficult years where our lives changed completely because of COVID-19. Although it's still in a virtual way, we hope this opening lecture set the tone of what we expect to be 2022 and beyond. An exchange of knowledge and experience regarding international relations and its related field of research. Right now, the war in Ukraine, which enters in its 19th day, will have a strong political, humanitarian, and economic impact, along with the pandemic in the world. Brazil is already feeling its impact with the recent rise of the gas price that happened 2 days ago. Our government has already announced our federal government has already announced the production of fertilizers, which Russia detain a great part of the production, in order to decrease or at least minimize the impact of our dependence in the agricultural sector. With no further ado, I'd like to invite Professor Jonathan Santos, who is going to be the chair of the opening lecture, to the floor so he can present our distinguished guest. Please, Jonathan.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you all from Moscow, Russia. Yes, indeed, as Dr. Christina has mentioned, we have been through a lot in the past 2 years. Since 2020, we have seen the world change, and it's of paramount importance to discuss such issue as this right now with Dr. Konstantin Petrovich, who will be having a lecture on how Russia's and Ukraine relations are tied and how it can, develop as well as in the future. I would like to say that Alla Barzova will be joining us a little bit later. She's having some technical issues, but she'll be here anytime soon as well. And in order to introduce Dr. Konstantin Petrovich, he's a doctor of historical science and a professor of Department of Theory and of International Relations at РУДН University in Moscow, Russia. He's also deputy head of scientific activities and member of the Universal Association for Contemporary European Studies in the United Kingdom. He's a member of International Studies Association of the Slavic State and European Eurasian Studies in the US, and he's also a member of the Russian Military Historical Society. And therefore, he's would be an important speaker to contribute not only for students, researchers, and also academics that are interested in the current issue. And later on, we'll be having Dr. Alla Barzova, who will be discussing how Russia and Brazil's relations are important in this time of uncertainty. So Dr. Alla Barzova is a professor of international relations at the Department of Theory of History of International Relations at РУДН University, also in Moscow, Russia. She specialized in history and culture of Latin America, as well as is a professor of think tanks and the developments in Spain and Europe, as well as the US. So I'll be giving now the floor for Dr. Konstantin to start his lecture. And thereon, we'll be following with the discussion and questions. Thank you. Dr. Konstantin, you have the floor.
Good morning, dear colleagues. I'm very glad to take part in this event. I thank you to invite me for this lecture. I thank my colleague Jonathan Santos, especially because we know each other for a long time. And you asked me to present the lecture about Russian-Ukrainian relations. It's my topic. I specialize in Ukrainian policy, internal, external, foreign policy. So I have some information for you, and I have a presentation. Yes, here it is. I know you would like to listen about the current situation in Russian-Ukrainian relations by my deeply opinion, and I'm sure that without the understanding the history, the background of our relations, we could not understand the current situation. So I prepare for you my lecture and name it Russian-Ukrainian relations 1991-2021 stages and problems. And let's start our lecture. First of all, I'd like to introduce my theme, and then we consider the stages of Russian-Ukrainian relations. First of all, I'd like to speak that the collapse of the Soviet Union led to the formation of independent states, the former Soviet republics, which were forced to build interstate relations. In the context of building bilateral Russian-Ukrainian relations, the fact that historically close relations have developed between Russia and Ukraine in all spheres was of particular importance, and the economic system of the two states was actually unified. In addition, both Russia and Ukraine were extremely interested in softening the consequences of the collapse of the USSR, especially in the economic sphere, which would have been very difficult without maintaining close cooperation between Ukrainian and Russian enterprises. However, such an approach was not supported by non-regional states, each of which had its own interests in relation to Ukraine. There are some stages in our relations, considering the policy of the Russian Federation towards Ukraine. It's conditionally possible to distinguish 6 stages. Here they are: 1991, 1994, the first stage; 1994, 2004, second; 2005, 2010, the third stage; 2010, 2014, fifth stage, fourth stage, and 2014-2019, the fifth stage, and the current stage, 2019, the present time. How we this stage is based. Stages are based on the periods of the reign of Ukrainian presidents, and we look through these stages, and I tell you about our relations in these stages. The first stage. The first stage is associated with the tenure of President Leonid Kravchuk at the head of the Ukrainian state. From the very first days of independence, the Ukrainian leadership headed for confrontation with Russia. At the same time, no attempts to eliminate pain points through negotiation of concessions, as a rule, did not change the position of Kiev. Ukraine has begun to create its own statehood on a rigid nationalist and Russophobic basis. The anti-Russian theme immediately became one of the key tasks, not only in school textbooks, but also in the press and on television. Reproaches against Russia and Russophobic statements by representatives of the Ukrainian leadership have become irreversible. In May 1992, Kiev refused to sign the Collective Security Treaty of the Commonwealth of Independent States. And in 1993, the Ukrainian leadership did not go beyond associate membership and did not sign an agreement on the formation of the Interstate Economic Committee, the first supranational body of the Commonwealth of Independent States. Ukraine did not sign the chapter of the Commonwealth of Independent States either, thereby technically refusing to become a member of the Commonwealth of Independent States. The main territorial problem was the ownership of the Crimean Peninsula and the city of Sevastopol, the naval base of the Black Sea Fleet. An attempt to resolve territorial issues between the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic and the Soviet Russia was made even before the collapse of the USSR. On November 19th, 1990s, Boris Yeltsin and Leonid Kravchuk signed the first interstate document that laid the foundation for future relations between independent Ukraine and Russia. According to Article 6 of the treaty, both parties recognize and respect the territorial integrity within the borders currently existing within the USSR. At the initiative of Russia, it was possible to resolve the issue of the nuclear-free status of Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan, which transferred to Russia the entire atomic potential located on their territories. On October 24th, 1991, a resolution of the Verkhovная Rada, Ukrainian parliament, on the non-nuclear status of Ukraine was adopted. And on January the 14th, 1992, a tripartite agreement between Russia, the United States of America, and Ukraine was signed. According to it, all atomic charges were dismantled and exported to Russia. Strategic bombers and mines for launching missiles, all of them were destroyed. In return, the United States and Russia provided guarantees for the independence and territorial integrity of Ukraine. On June 23, 1992, President Yeltsin and President Kravchuk signed an agreement in Dagomys on the further development of interstate relations, which emphasized that the parties will build their relations as friendly states. Second stage, 1994-2004. The second stage was determined by the activities of President Leonid Kuchma. The main feature of this stage was the idea of reintegration of the two countries supported by Russia but not shared in Ukraine, which largely determined Moscow's approaches towards Kyiv at that time. However, from the very moment of gaining independence, the Ukrainian leadership did not share the idea of reintegration with the Commonwealth of Independent States countries. And the Commonwealth itself considered it a kind of tool for civilized divorce. Since in its foreign policy, the country sought to move as far as possible from the former republics of the USSR. Such an approach predetermined the policy of the Ukraine within the framework of the post-Soviet space for a long time. This stage was characterized by crises in bilateral relations, caused by a number of controversial issues and unresolved problems. One of these issues was the territorial affiliation of the Crimean Peninsula, transferred by the Soviet Russia to the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic in 1954. It was noted that during the transfer of the peninsula, the norms of the legislation of the USSR in force at that time were violated. The parties managed to resolve the status of Crimea by granting it an autonomous status by Ukraine. A significant factor that influenced the crisis in bilateral relations was the issue of Sevastopol, precisely regarding its status during Soviet times. There was not administratively part of Crimea, which gave rise to dispute its belonging to Ukraine. The problem of the territorial belonging of the Crimea was closely connected with the problem of the division of the former Black Sea Fleet of the USSR. After negotiations in 1997, it was decided to divide the Black Sea Fleet between the two countries. An agreement was reached that the Russian Black Sea Fleet would be based in Sevastopol until 2017. Problems with the energy supply also became an acute issue, since many oil and gas pipelines from Russia to Europe during the Soviet era were led through the territory of Ukraine. In the 1990s, Ukraine was unauthorized sampling gas to fill its storage facilities with gas that was exported to Europe. After the conclusion of new agreements, part of Ukrainians' gas debt was written over against the transfer to Russia of some Soviet weapons inherited by Ukraine from the USSR, including strategic aircrafts such as Tu-95 and Tu-160 bombers. A significant place in Russian-Ukrainian relations was occupied by gas conflicts. The gas issue in relations between Russia and Ukraine arose almost immediately after the collapse of the USSR. The destruction of the common economic space of the former USSR gave rise to an economic crisis in the newly created states in all sectors, in particular in the oil and gas sector. The focus of Ukraine industry and the utilities sector on Russian gas has increased Ukraine's dependence on Russia. The geographical position of Ukraine also determined the inverse relationship. The passage of the majority of export gas pipelines through Ukrainian territory and the uncertain prospects for laying alternative gas pipelines to Ukrainian ones allowed Kyiv to defend its own position. On the other hand, Kyiv illegally seized gas from export to Europe into its own gas storage facilities. Conflicts related to the transportation of Russian export gas through Ukrainian pipelines in the 1990s demonstrated that no political arguments and agreements, statements and agreements can stop the unauthorized withdrawal of Russian export gas. Therefore, it was extremely important for Russia to lay alternative routes for energy supplies to Europe by passing the territory of Ukraine. Considering Ukraine's policy towards Russia, it's difficult to clearly identify the stages since all the leaders of independent Ukraine, without exception, sought to integrate with Euro-Atlantic structures. The pace of this process did not depend on the aspirations of Ukraine, but on the position of NATO and the European Union, which were in no hurry to accept Ukraine as their member. During President Kuchma's presidency, Ukraine pursued a multi-vector foreign policy, thanks to which relations between Ukraine and Russia remained at the fairly stable level. Moreover, according to the Big Treaty of 1997, Ukraine and Russia were proclaimed strategic partners. In 2002, Ukraine became an associate member of the Eurasian Economic Cooperation, and then took steps to join the common economic space. Industrial cooperation developed between Russia and Ukraine in various sectors of the economy. The intensive development of Ukrainian-Russian relations was facilitated by the fact that the European Union and NATO did not consider the possibility of Ukraine joining these organizations. The third stage, 2004-2010. In 2004, presidential elections were held in Ukraine, in which the main struggle unfolded between two candidates, Viktor Yushchenko and Viktor Yanukovych, who was considered by many a pro-Russian candidate, in contrast to the pro-Western candidate, Viktor Yushchenko. In his public speeches, Yanukovych declared the need for integration with Russia, about giving the Russian language the status of a second state language in Ukraine, thereby trying to win the sympathy of voters from the southern and eastern regions of Ukraine. Ukrainian-Russian relations escalated after Yushchenko came to power during the Orange Revolution of 2004, which Russia assessed as anti-constitutional and stimulated by the West. Yushchenko's victory in the elections in Ukraine was for the most part perceived both in Ukraine and in Russia and in the West as the biggest defeat of Russian foreign policy in recent years. The new authorities of Ukraine were not aimed at deepening integration with Russia. A course was taken to accuse Russia of organizing the Holodomor of 1929-1933 and aimed at gradually ousting the Russian language from use in Ukraine. The main issue of bilateral relations after 2004 were demarcation of the border, Ukraine's membership in NATO, the problem of the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Federation in Sevastopol, gas conflicts, To solve specific problems in March 2005, the Putin-Yushchenko Special Commission was created within the framework of 4 committees on defense, foreign policy, economic and humanitarian cooperation. In 2006 and 2009, there were 2 sharp gas conflicts, which led first to the termination of Russian gas supplies to Ukraine, and later to Ukraine's unwillingness to resume the transit of Russian gas through its territory to Europe. Due to the unreliability of Ukraine as a transit country, the Russian Federation decided to implement projects for the construction of new gas supply routes to the European Union. The commissioning of new pipelines such as the Yamal Europa, Nord Stream has led to a gradual reduction in the flow and gas through the Ukrainian gas transmission network. In turn, Ukraine announced new priorities in its energy policy, setting the task of reducing dependence on Russia for gas supplies by searching for alternative sources. Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, and Turkmenistan were considered as such sources. The task was set to create an open, transparent market for the sale and purchase and transportation of hydrocarbons from the Caspian region to Europe by diversifying supply routes by passing Russia. To this end, Ukraine reanimated Project Guam. It was an international organization named by the first alphabet, Georgia, Ukraine, Azerbaijan, Moldova, Guam, established in the second half of the 1990s, actively participated in the creation of the Baltic Black Sea Caspian Energy Transit Space, holding Energy Summit in 2006-2008. These events were distinguished by political engagement and non-participation of Russia in them. Most of these plans have remained only declaration, not having received their practical implementation. 4th stage, 2010-2014. In February 2010, Viktor Yanukovych, who won the presidential election in Ukraine, put forward new foreign policy guidelines, increasing the economic return from external contacts while maintaining the neutral status of the country. The new president believed that Ukraine's strategic goal was not to join NATO, but to join the European Union. In addition, Kiev did not support the idea of a union of the states of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. The European choice of Ukraine, according to Yanukovych, is associated with an increase in the economic efficiency of the country, the observance of the rights of all national minorities living in the Ukraine, as well as the establishment of Ukraine as a reliable business partner. In April 2010, the president of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Medvedev, visited Kharkov city in Ukraine. During the visit, the leaders of the countries reached an important agreement on extending the stay of the Russian Black Sea Fleet in Crimea by 25 years, and on the supply of Russian gas to Ukraine on preferential terms. In mid-2010, a new law of Ukraine on the fundamentals and domestic and foreign policy was adopted. The law fixed the refusal of Ukraine from the course to join NATO, securing its non-bloc status. European integration remained a foreign policy priority at the same time. Thus, hopes for a change in foreign policy priorities towards Russia did not come true. Despite the pro-European course of the new leadership of the country in October 2011, the heads of government of most of the Commonwealth of Independent States countries, including Russia and Ukraine, signed the Treaty of the Free Trade Area. At the end of 2012, beginning 2013, Russia made efforts to include Ukraine in the customs union project, noting the benefits for the Ukrainian economy from participation in this organization. First of all, we are talking about the opportunity to purchase Russian energy carriers at the preferential rates. However, Ukraine emphasizing its course towards European integration, agreed to participate in the customs union only as an observer, proposing interaction in the 3+1 format. Russia, in turn, said that it considers that such a format unacceptable. In this regard, Ukraine did not receive selective preference in trade with the countries of the customs union. Yanukovych believed that it was enough to blackmail Russia and the West with the fact that the Ukraine could go to another, and demanded gifts from both sides. He tried to play a double game. Allegedly moving towards Europe, he sent encouraging signals towards Russia as well. In 2013, Ukraine took a step towards the European Union. On September 18, the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine approved the draft association agreement with the European Union. This caused a backlash in Russia. In October, President Putin said that in the event of an association with the European Union, Ukraine would not be able to join the customs union. Despite the policy of signing an association agreement with the European Union, discussions continue in Ukraine about the advantages and disadvantages of this move. At the end of November 2013, the government of Ukraine suspended preparations for the conclusion of the association agreement between Ukraine and the European Union, which led to mass protests in the western Ukrainian regions and in Kyiv. To consolidate Ukraine's policy of not signing the agreement, in December 2013, Russia announced a reduction in gas prices for Ukraine and the provision of significant financial support of $15 billion. At the expense of the National Wealth Fund, Russia purchased Ukrainian Eurobonds worth on $3 billion. Fifth stage, 2014-2019. In February 2014, a new stage of Russian-Ukrainian relations began, which was associated with the violent seizure of power by the opposition. The legitimate president of the country, Yanukovych, was overthrown and the new government was formed. The actions of the new authorities were supported by the West, which relied on nationalist forces whose ideology denied any rapprochement with Russia. The coming of these forces to power in Kyiv was not accepted in Crimea and Donbass. Moreover, the new authorities immediately launched an offensive against the rights and interests of Russians, trying to force them to accept what happened in Kyiv. After the referendum of the reunification of Crimea with Russia and the beginning the conflict in the Donbass, Further actions of the new authorities in Kiev were aimed at the maximum possible severance of ties with Russia. In 2014, President Poroshenko banned any cooperation with Russia in military sphere and tore up the corresponding agreement between the two countries. The Ukrainian authorities banned the broadcast of Russian television channels and films. Avoiding bilateral personal contacts with the Russian leadership, Poroshenko, after the failure of the attempts the Ukrainian army to carry out a forceful blitzkrieg in the Donbass and provoke Russia's involvement in the internal Ukrainian conflict, had to go to multivectoral negotiations in the so-called Minsk. Representatives of Ukraine, representatives of Russia, and the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe, as well as leaders of the self-proclaimed Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. And another format, diplomacy format, Normandy, with leaders of Russia, Ukraine, Germany, and France. The result was the signing of the Minsk agreements. On February 12, 2015, the leaders of Germany, France, Ukraine, and Russia in the format of Normandy 4 in Minsk agreed on a set of measures to implement the Minsk agreement, Minsk the second, in order to de-escalate the armed conflict in eastern Ukraine. Ukraine abandoned the policy of non-alignment, and NATO membership again became one of the main priorities in foreign policy, which was recorded in the new version of the law of Ukraine on the fundamentals and domestic and foreign policy in 2015, and the new national security strategy of Ukraine in the same year. And Russia was named the main adversary in the new version of military doctrine of Ukraine in 2015. Summing up, among the internal political factors influencing the foreign policy of Ukraine, one should single out the instability of the political system of Ukraine, which led to struggle between the elites for power. The political reforms carried out by the leadership of the state have once again shown the Ukrainian authorities are guided in their actions not so much by national interests as by the principle of political expediency. An important internal political factor in shaping Ukraine's foreign policy is the sharp gap in interests between elite groups and society. Thus, a significant part of the representatives of mass groups, especially in the southeast of the country, was not satisfied with the course of the one-sided pro-Western orientation of Ukraine's foreign policy, which one way or another influenced the actions of the state leadership. As a result, Ukrainian foreign policy has led to an aggravation of relations with Russia, while at the same time not achieving success in integration with the European Union. President Poroshenko and the authorities of Ukraine were aimed at a unilateral orientation towards the United States and the European Union, while destroying all ties with Russia. Such a one-sided orientation is unlikely to produce tangible results in times of economic and political upheaval. Therefore, Ukraine will apparently have to develop economic relations with Russia and other countries of the Eurasian Economic Union and the Customs Union. And the sixth stage, the current stage, 2019-2022. The new president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, confirmed the invariance of Kiev's strategic course for maximum integration with the West, which implies the country's entry into the European Union and NATO. In relations with the European Union, the Ukrainian authorities focused on solving practical issue of European integration, calling on Brussels to clearly define and conditions for Ukraine's admission to the European Union. With regard to NATO, emphasis is also placed on practical steps leading, in the opinion of the Ukrainian authorities, to full-fledged membership of Ukraine in NATO. Unlike Poroshenko, who persistently sought to obtain a NATO membership action plan, Zelensky relied on the implementation of less ambitious but more realistic tasks, in particular ensuring the compatibility of the armed forces of Ukraine with the armed forces of the alliance. On May 26, 2020, Vladimir Zelensky approved the annual program for the implementation of Ukraine's Euro-Atlantic integration policy. Particular attention in the program is paid to the issue of achieving the country's compliance with the criteria for membership in NATO, the transfer of the security sector and defense system of Ukraine to the standards of the alliance. In June 2020, Brussels granted the request of the Ukrainian Cabinet of Ministers to grant Ukraine the status of a enhanced opportunities partner. The main goal of this program is to strengthen the interoperability of the troops of the participating countries with the armed forces of NATO. Thus, Kiev is consistently creating the necessary prerequisites for joining the ranks of its Euro-Atlantic allies, which consider the Russian Federation one of the main potential adversaries. In the Russian direction, there were no fundamental changes in Kiev's policy. The main condition for improving bilateral relations, Zelensky calls the return to Crimea to Ukraine. He considers the occupation of peninsula to be the same priority as the return of Donbass, and in this regard, he has repeatedly called on Western partners to tighten the regime of anti-Russian sanctions. Kiev remained an active opponent of the Nord Stream 2 project and tried, in alliance with Poland and the Baltic states, to oppose its implementation. Contrary to pre-election promises, the new president continued his predecessor's course towards the total Ukrainization of the country. In particular, Zelensky did not abandon Poroshenko's language policy. Moreover, in March 2020, Zelensky signed the law on complete general secondary education, transferring from the September 1st, 2020, all public schools to teaching in the Ukrainian language. Education in Russian, according to this law, is preserved only in elementary school. A stable anti-Russian consensus has developed in the country. A wide range of Ukrainian elite hold Russophobic position. One of the most important factors behind Zelensky's victory in the presidential election in 2019 was his promise to end the war in Donbass. However, the situation in the southeast of the country continued to be at the impasse. Having come to power, Zelensky initiated the resumption of the work of the Normandy 4 format, which was suspended in 2016 due to the lack of progress in the implementation of Minsk agreements. At the same time, Zelensky saw his main task in rewriting the Minsk agreements with the support of Paris, Berlin, and Washington, changing the order of the steps agreed upon in them, primarily the point on transferring control over the border with Russia to Ukraine. Fundamental changes in Kyiv's position in these directions were not expected. Firstly, influential forces in the United States, under the patronage of which the Kyiv authorities are interested in maintaining the conflict of the border with Russia. Secondly, in Ukraine, the position of the party of war, represented by radical nationalists, are very strong. And thirdly, a significant part of the Ukrainian population is focused on ending the war exclusively on Kyiv's term. As a result, Zelensky continued the course of Poroshenko, whose policies he sharply criticized during the election campaign. Relatively speaking, the president has changed, but the political course and vector of the country's movement has not changed, which led to the intensification of the crisis in the relations with Russia and led to the current situation. Thank you for your attention. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Konstantin. Thank you, Dr. Konstantin. As we understand, it's very important to understand the situation, the historical situation, as Dr. Konstantin has mentioned, in order to understand the discourse of the current situation right now. And in order to continue, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Ale Yurov, my previous supervisor, and someone who is an expert in Brazilian foreign policy, as well as how Brazil would be affected or maybe not on the current events. And later on, we'll be giving the floor for everyone who has questions. And you can write these questions down and we'll be answering them accordingly. Dr. Ale Yurov, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me?
Yes.
At last, I finished with all technical difficulties and joined a group. I'm a specialist in Brazil in foreign policy and diplomacy of Brazil, of course, and I can show my latest book, The History of Foreign Policy and Diplomacy of Brazil, and now we are translating it in English. But to tell some words about Ukraine, I could tell that there are a lot of double standards in the position of West and especially of the United States of America. We all now know that without referendum in Crimea, we could get American military base in now our frontiers. And it was the common decision of the population of Crimea during the referendum. And now we see a very complicated, difficult situation in Donbass and in two republics, especially in Donbass. The people they didn't want to leave Ukraine as the state, but they wanted the respect of their choice. They wanted to use Russian language, because a lot of population there are Russian. And during 8 years, nobody wanted to note that there was a civil war of the Ukrainian Nazi of the Ukrainian hitmen who killed 7 people in Donbass. During 8 years, we can tell about 14,000 killed people. And as Dr. Konstantin showed, he is the greatest, the biggest specialist in Ukrainian foreign policy and Ukrainian-Russian relations. Our country tried to use different formats, different kind of negotiations to resolve this situation. And it was impossible. I think you can see the map. And now our country is speaking about security, about common security for every country. But we see military bases around our frontiers. And now everybody, I hope that in Brazil, everybody now knows about biological laboratories, American biological laboratories on the territory of Ukraine. There were a lot of dangers for our country. And I think it was a very difficult choice for my president, for our leaders to begin the preventive war against the Ukrainian Nazis. I think it's the own chance to resolve this crucial situation. And I would like to add one more interesting fact. Joseph Biden and his son Hunter Biden, they had a lot of business on the territory of the Ukraine. And one of interesting facts is that I think they are trying to get rid of the knowledge about their activity on the territory of Ukraine. It's a multi-stepped operation from the West. I hope that the war can be finished in shortest time. I hope. But I think there was no other chance to do it. You can compare on the situation in Belarus. It looks like a situation in Venezuela, when the West, the collective West, tried to break the power of a legal president of this country. We saw the chance to try to organize a Goldstat in Kazakhstan. We see that nobody wanted to think about general security for everybody. And I can compare once more the situation with the civil war in Spain. It was internal thing, but there were a lot of participants from different countries who tried to follow their own things. It's very difficult to speak about the war. I like to discuss much more about diplomacy methods of negotiation, of resolving contradictions. And Santos and me, we wrote about it, about the policy of Brazil, peaceful policy of Brazil, trying to use the preventive diplomacy. But in this case, we had no chance to use the preventive diplomacy. I think so.
Thank you, Dr. Barzova. We have a question for Dr. Konstantin, which is from Andrea Pacheco, Dr. Andrea Pacheco. And she's asking if it's clear to see the escalation of this conflict right now. And she's asking, do you see this conflict as a sign or an indication of a new world order following the 9/11?
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Konstantin?
Is he with us?
Yeah, he should be here.
Mm-hmm. We use negotiations. We try to look for some decision of this conflict. But just now, we don't have the chance to understand each other. And we see a lot of participants, mercenaries, international mercenaries on the territory of Ukraine. It's very difficult to tell about the short fin of this conflict, the short end, the end of this conflict in short time. I think so.
Thank you, Dr. Borzova. Dr. Konstantin is here. He's back. Okay, Dr. Konstantin, you have two questions. One is from Dr. Andrea Pacheco.
Yes, excuse me, technical problems. Yes, our president, Vladimir Putin, says that about the situation that we deals with the empire of lies. United States is an empire of lies. Many years ago, President Reagan calls Soviet Union empire of evil, and now the United States is empire of lies. There is this country control all international sources of information, and so they could transfer anything for not have any really facts. Sorry for my English.
Mm-hmm. And I can add that in the dialogue between our embassy in Vatican with Pope Francisco, Pope Francisco said that he heard nothing about victims in Donbass. He heard nothing, he knew nothing. It's the result of what Dr. Konstantin said about the limited information for all the world, except for what is comfortable for the United States, except for that information.
Thank you, Dr. Borzova. I have another question from Cristina Carvalho. She's asking if Putin already considered the events in Kiev, and if it's already expected to see the occupation of the two republics, the separatist republics, or to occupy the whole of Ukraine as at the moment. It was a surprise for all of us or not?
President Putin said that Russia will not occupy the Ukraine. Russia have some aims in Ukraine. They are demilitarization, denazification, and have an opportunity to develop this country as a friendly with Russia.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask if there is any more questions. I have one question actually to Dr. Borzova. How do you see now, like, that we are, of course, seeing that a lot of these events are transforming the way we see the world, its security, international relation, and many other forms. We see right now that in Brazil, the price of gas and oil and other commodities are more expensive, which is a concern, of course, for Brazilians who are working and who does not have the benefit to have international assets, for instance. And how do you see in the near future how this crisis can escalate in the prices, not only in Brazil, but also in the in Latin America in general? Like, would you see that the leaders of Latin America, they would be able to stop the prices from rising or not? Thank you, Dr. Borzova.
Thank you, Jonathan, for your question. You know that Russia sold gas to Europe, sold during many years, and never broke its obligations, never played with prices on gas, and situation European Union around the gas is not our fault. It's the fault of European himself. And what about Latin America? I think it's necessary to be quiet without any panic and to think about integration. There is a lot of gas in Latin America. And I think be quiet, don't worry about the price on the gas. After the finishing of this war, I think some world order will change. And it's necessary to think about China, about India, about Iran, about other states who are going that the world can hear their voice, and of course Brazil, and they must take part in the forming the new world's order, more comfortable for everybody, not only for United States. And the situation in Europe with gas, of course, is partly a fault of the United States. When the situation became critical, United States promised to put their liquid gas to Europe, but instead preferred to transfer it to China because the price was higher. So it's the real friend in need.
Thank you very much. We have another question for Dr. Konstantin. He has only 20 minutes. He's asking now, the Patriarch Kirill has made harsh statements about Ukrainians. What is the real role of the Orthodox Church in the formation of opinion in Russia? Dr. Konstantin?
The position of Orthodox Church of Russia is support the official position of Russian authority. Russian Orthodox people in Ukraine have great problems for many years. Nationalists gave the churches from Russian Orthodox Church. They have many problems with using the opportunity to take
their needs, maybe to take their needs, religious needs.
Yes, sorry, there's a technical issue. There's another question. Is there any evidence in this conflict that the international relation theories didn't foresee in their studies any new reactions or tactics?
It's very difficult, I think, to tell about some theory of international relations. We can tell about it when we can analyze after the end of this conflict.
Yes, I would just add, I would like to add something actually. I would say that when you look at international relations, usually when we study international relations, we say that there are two lines in international relations that are very pivotal. One is diplomacy, the other one is the military. And in this case, as you could see, that this conflict has going on for 80 years and over. And we could say that all the diplomatical methods that are used to safeguard even the theories of international relations itself did not prevail. And therefore, comes the next part with the military, to which we will enhance the dialogues that is in discussion right now. So we can see that all these reactions and tactics, we don't see anything new here, because we can compare with the other conflicts that had before in the past and in other regions. And as we can see, as Putin said himself, Russia was already used to sanctions. And as we can see that these sanctions that are being imposed right now was, of course, foreseen by the Kremlin, which is not evident. And that's why maybe we need a whole change, not only in the organizations that we have right now, such as the United Nations, the Security Council, in order to see new tactics, new reactions, and then therefore seeing new ways of new diplomatical agreements.
Of course, quite agree with you. And I would like to add some about double standards of USA. You know that United States bought oil from our country when they refused to buy it from Venezuela. But now, as the result of the sanctions, they refused to buy our oil, and now they begin negotiations with Venezuela again. First of all, they climbed Maduro. They tried to organize some kind of orange revolution on the territory of Venezuela. And now they stop speaking about sanctions about Venezuela when they had the need to buy oil from this country. So their reaction, their attitude toward Venezuela changed greatly. And what about Cuba? Cuba lives during 60 years under sanctions, and they live. And we adopted to the sanctions and will adopt in the future.
Dr. Borzova, have one question. Is your opinion about China's role in this conflict? As we know so far that China has been very neutral. And so Claudia Oliveira is asking, how do you see China's role in this conflict?
I think that first of all, Chinese maybe not approve completely, but in some part they approve our activity because they suffer from American sanctions themselves, and they think about a more just world, more just a regulation of relations. And you must remember that every fourth person in the world is Chinese, and it's necessary to take in mind their opinion. First of all, they are neutral, and later we will see.
We have one more question from Lauro Asioli. He's asking, would the Russian media also be limited to only showing the Russian side? What happens to Russians who come forward against the president's actions?
About our comfort, Russians?
He's asking if how Russian media is being limited
No.
from the Russian side. And also he's asking what happens to Russians who stand against the president's actions.
But they can tell their opinion. Those who are against the president's activity. There are no limits.
And he's asking about the media. Is it being actually controlled? Is being limited by the Russian side or not?
But you can see during each press conference of our president, there are representatives from different media, and they can give their question to our president without any organization, without any limit. And what about the limit of Instagram? There were some attempts to kill Russians everywhere. To kill Russians everywhere. And I'm quite agree that it was necessary to cancel the activity of this line of media. It's unnecessary. It's impossible to tell about the killing of every person in the world. It's impossible.
I would like to inform Danielle Silva that Dr. Konstantin had to leave, and he's not here at the moment, so he will not be able to answer the question. I would like to know if there is any more question to Dr. Borzova.
Mm-hmm. What about question? What kind of question?
He's asking, many historians and other academics outside the ER are claiming we are witnessing the beginning of a Cold War 2.0. Do you agree?
A Cold War.
If it's a new Cold War, do you agree that it's a new Cold War being installed?
I think it will be the beginning of a new world order. I don't know if it will be Cold War 020, but we are united in our world. The world is too little now, too small, and it will be impossible to follow the Cold War for a long time. We are very united. We depend from each other.
Thank you. Is there any more questions? I don't think there is any more questions. I would like to thank everyone for being in this meeting today, in this opening lecture. I'd like to thank Dr. Konstantin Petrovich for being here to give his to shed some light in the recent events. I'd like to also address the fact that all the informations that we see or hear in Russia that we are right now, or in the West, or in Brazil itself, it's very important for us as academics, students, and many other people from all different types of paths of life to be careful what you see and analyze. It's important to understand the history, the cultural intertwine that they have, both sides have. And I also think it's important for us to understand the literature involved and to be, of course, aware that information and misinformation is very huge in the 21st century. And therefore, we have to take some part in the directions to which we want to lead. And therefore, I think it's very important to hear both sides, to understand the diplomatic reasons and why we study international relations for the first place. And as we understand, diplomacy, yes, is the key for many of the issues that are being happening right now. And I do agree with Ala Barzova that Brazil, and not only Brazil, but other countries, they should stand together in order to find new political or diplomatic ways of solving issues. And I would like to thank everyone for giving us the floor to speak, to share our knowledge. And I'd like to thank Dr. Barzova for being here and so interested in Brazil as well. And Andrea Pacheco, who invited us, and everyone else, Dr. Christina as well. And that's it for today. I hope you guys understood a little bit of what is going on from this side of the world. And of course, we are open for receiving your inquiries. If you have any questions or anything further, you could directly contact us at the university, or Dr. Barzova personally, or Dr. Konstantin Petrovich.
Thank you. Thank you very much.